Bless, O Lord. Bless, O Lord, not only the words of my mouth, but the thoughts of all of our hearts. You who are our rock, our only strength, and our Redeemer. Amen. I had the privilege of serving Broad Street in downtown Columbus for 5 years. It's a wonderful inner city congregation deeply enmeshed in the community. 4 nights a week they serve meals to the homeless, about 25,000 meals a year. Every year they have a freedom school for 80 to 100 inner city children, a free legal clinic, and housing for single mothers who are in recovery and trying to find their feet from alcohol and drugs and sometimes the dual diagnosis of mental health. I used to say that when you opened the doors in the city would come in. And one of the things that was a part of being an inner city church is that Broad Street had this corner in the back between 2 parking lots. It was a little secluded, or at least secluded enough that some of our friends used it to relieve themselves. Well, on a hot Saturday morning, I walked into a trustees meeting having crossed the stream. And I said, one of these days I'm gonna get a sign that says, please do not pee on my church. One of the trustees believed me. You cannot make this stuff up. I came around that corner. It was on the building. And I saw viral. And oh my God. And I went into the church and I said, get it down. I want you to know it's devastating to see your sin in print. Do you hear what I'm saying? What I know is that if the poor had a bathroom, they'd use it. I love those folks. And I had never wanted to greet them with anything that hinted at or implied that there was a criteria for making them welcome. And I was ashamed. I keep this sign. It's going to my funeral. Because I have to remember that in a moment, my mouth, in an instant, has the power to make a sacred space unsafe and unwelcoming. Don't you wish the 10 Commandments had fixed us? They're there to examine and correct and to snap us out of ourselves, but let's take a look at how we're doing. In my devotion on the day before Ash Wednesday, February 13th, the writer stated that 10 years ago, the Prime Minister of Australia issued a national apology to Aboriginal families torn apart by the Australian government agencies and church missions during the period between 1869 and 1969. 69. Children were taken from their homes, forced into institutions where they were often unable to speak their native language. They were given new names and new birth dates. It's estimated that between 1910 and 1971, 55,000 children were taken from their families. People of faith did this. Does it ring a bell for you right now? Thou shalt not steal. I don't know about you, but I dare to ask the question of myself, how am I doing? I confess to you, I am not an A student. I have never coveted anyone's ox. But I do covet Cynthia Palmer's wardrobe. Is she not an elegant woman? Murder, I've considered it. Do you know those places in traffic where you have to merge lanes and there are people waiting in line, and then there are those who whiz by you to cut in front? You know who you are. I bear false witness. And in my car, I say ugly things about you. It would be a rare person in this room that could not name someone who is dead to you and is still breathing.
Fix it up, brother.
And what about other gods? Have not our divisions and disagreements become our graven images and the righteous things that we worship? It doesn't matter much if we're talking about immigration or our brothers and sisters who identify differently in their sexuality. Doesn't matter if it's gun control. Have we not been tempted to turn our arguments into that which we worship? Now let's just face it. The gods we've decided to create and worship are just easier. Ellsworth Callis said, idols are manageable. And we humans are always looking for a manageable God. We want one that's predictable, one that does our bidding, one that comforts us and doesn't demand much back. Now that's a useful God. But just as surely as idols seek to make God smaller and more manageable, do they not also make us small? What I do know is that I am incapable, that we are incapable of saving ourselves from ourselves. We have every right to protect and turn away those in need. Every right, but it's not church. We have a right to disagree and go to our own camps, but it's not church. Oh, I have a right to put anything on a sign, but it's not church. God, forgive me. We do have to be open to the questions, because our openness to this question would have us begin to ponder if we understand the rules and in the process have missed the rule maker. There are two critical things in this text that I dare say we miss, beloved. Thomas Long, in his Dancing the Decalogue, says this: understanding the Ten Commandments as a set of burdens or rules overlooks something essential, namely that they are prefaced not by an order, here are the 10, obey them, but instead by a breathtaking announcement of freedom. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. God knows us, knows our frailty, and reached for us before he gave us some hopeful direction. In truth, we are destined to fail. It is inevitable. It's part of our human fabric. Nothing new, won't ever be. So what does God do about our inability to keep up our end of the bargain? God made a covenant. Now, contracts are those formal agreements based on mutual understanding. Everyone agrees to the terms, the documents are created, and everybody benefits in the end, unless anyone defaults or doesn't keep up their end, and then it's over. But from the beginning, God's formal agreement, God's plan with us was rooted in covenant. God's covenant is governed by the irrational rules of grace. The bottomless love of a parent. Make no mistake, God makes these commitments, the covenants to us, with the full understanding and appreciation that our strengths, our talents, and our desire is to be faithful. And with the full understanding and appreciation of our imperfection, our failings, and our inability. So thanks be to God. This is a time to name our sin, not because we will finally be successful over our brokenness, but because we recognize the gift of God's love in claiming us in the first place. God's love is a promise. That we are God's children is by God's gracious choice. And that, more than anything, is what makes the difference. Don't know if you've read Father Gregory Boyle's book, Barkin to the Choir. He's been working with gangs in Los Angeles since 1988. He's created jobs and recovery programs. It's a phenomenal experience. And PBS decided to interview him. And at the end of the interview, the guy said, "How does it feel to have saved thousands and thousands of lives?" Not trying to be coy or cute, he says. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. I was not aware that I had saved any lives. I remained utterly convinced that my life has been saved by them. Repeatedly. When I need patience, the homies save me from my impatience. And when I'm completely convinced of the rightness of my position, they rescue me with a dose of humility. And when I lack courage, my homies rescue me from my cowardice. Days don't go by without them saving me. He told the interviewer he thought saving was up to the Coast Guard. Well, I'm telling you, it's been done. There was a woman quite convinced that she just had to go to Homeboys to volunteer and be a part of the experience. And he asked her quite directly, "Why is it that you want to come?" And she says, "I have a message for those young people." And he said, "Well, when you lose that message, you're welcome." He said, "We don't point the cursor at some lost soul and push the save button. We don't need to come do something. The right question to ask is, what will happen to you in the presence of God and your brothers and sisters?" We're always going to be faced with a choice. Will we think we have the power to save it, or will we simply savor the power and presence of God as God does God's work? Let's propose that savoring is better. That the saving is God's work. And when we open our hearts and our lives, the way of God's love will be more than enough. One of the great gifts of this text is that it begins with that covenant and then it ends with something we're tempted to absolutely miss. When Moses comes down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments, the folks are horrified. They're scared to death, and they said, "What are we going to do?" And Moses says, "Quit your fretting. Quit your fretting. It's only a test." The people of Israel were accustomed to the test, and when they went through Marah in chapter 15, they were tested with bitter water, and God made it sweet. And then when they're going through the wilderness, they're tested with the quail and the manna from heaven. So what's this test thing? It's God's dance with us. Not for perfection, but whether or not we can begin to understand that our test is not of faithfulness to God, but of whether or not we can love each other like God loves us. Brian Zand, if you haven't seen his book, Sinners in the Hands of a Loving God, it's a take on Jonathan Edwards. The subtitle is The Scandalous Truth of the Very Good News. In this beautiful book, he talks about Rembrandt's portrait of the return of the prodigal son. He's come from a far country. He's been to hell, and you can see it. His clothes are dirty and torn. His shoes are worn out. He has the shaved head of a prisoner, and his face is buried in the richness of his father's robes. He is kneeling, and the father's hands hold him gently. One minute they're holding him, and the next minute they're clapping and saying, "Get my boy a robe. Get him a ring. and kill that calf. We're going to feast. You see, it was in the far country that the prodigal was in danger, not in the hands of his father. Zan goes on to say, I want you to know that it is God's attitude, God's spirit toward you and me is one of unwavering love. We have nothing to fear from God. God's not mad at you or me. God's never been mad at us because that was God's promise. It's the wisdom of fearing God's love, the decision not to act against it with each other. That's the test. Now we're going to fail. But would we begin to learn that that love has already cost our God so much? And that that way of loving is still the only way to save us and the world. Did you watch the wedding? Wasn't it fun to see how the gospel still can turn the world upside down? One critic said that he had taken over the wedding and it was too much church. Bishop Michael Curry said this: imagine a world where love is the way. Imagine our homes and our families when love is the way. Imagine neighborhoods and communities where love is the way. Imagine governments and nations where love is the way. Imagine business and commerce when love is the way. Imagine this tired old world when love is the way. When unselfish, sacrificial, redemptive love is the way, then no child will go to bed hungry in this world ever again. When love is the way, we will let justice roll down like a mighty stream and righteousness like an ever-flowing rock, a brook. When love is the way, poverty will become history. When love is the way, the earth will be a sanctuary. I just want to say, it won't be enough. Hear me, it won't be enough. It will be everything.